January 17, 1940. Somewhere over Southern California, the desert holds the cold close to its chest in the hour before sunrise. The sky is a vast, gradient dome indigo at the zenith, bleeding into a band of pale, hesitant lemon at the horizon, streaked with high, feathery cirrus clouds that catch the first unseen light. The air is perfectly still, scented with creosote, coal dust, and a sharp, metallic tang of aviation fuel. On the apron, the machine sits under the glare of work lights, their electric hum the only sound breaking the silence. It is the North American NA-73X, a prototype without a squadron, without a past. Its aluminum skin is bare, unpainted, gleaming dully like a freshly minted coin under the artificial beams. It looks almost fragile in its newness, a complex sculpture of wind and mathematics given form. Mechanics, their faces shadowed by caps, move around it with a reverence mixed with urgent practicality. Their boots crunch on the gravel, their breath pluming in thick, white clouds. One man leans deep into the engine cowling, his hands working with precise, blind familiarity on the Allison V1710 engine, 12 cylinders of dormant potential. Another checks the tautness of the control wires, a gentle pluck sending a low harmonic through the airframe. There is no crowd, no brass band, no generals with gleaming braids, only a handful of engineers in wool jackets, their faces etched with a fatigue born of 100 sleepless nights and 100 frantic calculations. They clutch steaming mugs of coffee, watching, waiting. This is not a ceremony, it is a test, a silent birth. The pilot emerges from a low hangar, a figure of calm focus amidst the tension. He wears a leather jacket worn soft at the elbows, a scarf tucked into his collar. He completes a slow, deliberate walk around, his gloved hand pausing to rest on the cool metal of the fuselage just behind the canopy. It is a gesture of connection, of assessment. He then hoists himself into the cockpit, a snug, businesslike space of black rubber, brushed steel, and glass. The canopy closes behind him with a definitive, airtight thunk, sealing him into a new world. A ground crewman gives a thumbs up. The ritual begins. The inertial starter whines. A high-pitched scream that shreds the morning calm, then a cough, a sputter of raw flame from the exhaust stacks, and then ignition. The Allison engine roars to life, not with a clean scream, but with a deep, visceral, churning growl that vibrates through the concrete, through the bones of the watching men, and out into the sleeping desert. The propeller becomes a translucent disc, blasting back a hurricane of dust and deafening sound. The machine trembles with eager power, straining against its chocks. It is alive. It taxis, a creature of magnificent noise, turning its nose into the wind now beginning to stir with the dawn. At the runway's end, it pauses. The engine note changes, rising to a furious, focused thunder. Then, release. The wheels leave the frost-tinged concrete. The landing gear retracts with a solid clunk thud. The NA-73X climbs, not with a steep, frantic ascent, but with a swift, purposeful grace, its silhouette sharp against the now pinkening sky. It banks once, a flash of sun on bare metal, and then heads east, becoming a speck, then a memory, then a rumor in the vastness. In a farmhouse in Bavaria, a rooster crows. In a Messerschmitt design office in Augsburg, a man sharpens a pencil. None of them heard the engine. History, at that moment, was a silent movie, but the reel had started to turn, and if the German pilots, the knights of the Jagdgeschwader, had seen that raw, unpainted shape, they would have offered a dismissive, confident chuckle. They were laughing at a ghost that did not yet know it was a ghost. The world into which this machine was born was a world coming apart at the seams. The year 1940 was a year of shadows and falling dominoes. The phony war had ended with the violent, shocking reality of the Blitzkrieg. Poland had been carved up. Norway was invaded. France, the bulwark of democracy for a generation, collapsed in a stunning 6-week campaign. Its armies scattered, its spirit broken. The Luftwaffe, a tactical instrument of terrifying efficiency, ruled the European skies. Stuka dive bombers fell with shrieking sirens, precise instruments of terror. The Messerschmitt Bf-109, a lean, lethal predator, was the quintessential fighter of its day. Piloted by a cadre of veterans hardened in Spain and Poland, Britain stood alone, an island under siege. its Royal Air Force fighting a desperate, existential battle in the high summer skies above the Channel. The Spitfire and Hurricane were magnificent defenses, but they were defenses. They lacked the reach to strike back. Across the Atlantic, the United States was a giant stirring in its sleep, officially neutral but morally galvanized. Its factories hummed with promise, but its military aviation was, by European standards, naive. The British, backs to the wall, turned to these American factories as a lifeline. In May 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American aviation with a desperate request. Could they build the Curtiss P-40 under license? The president of North American, James H. Dutch Kindleberger, and his chief designer, a brilliant, German-born engineer named Edgar Schmude, gave a daring counter-proposal. Give us 120 days. We will design you a better fighter from the ground up. It was an audacious, nearly suicidal promise. The British, with little to lose, agreed. What followed was an industrial miracle. Schmude and his team worked around the clock. They employed a revolutionary laminar flow wing, designed in cooperation with the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. Its shape derived from mathematics and wind tunnels to minimize drag. The airframe was designed for simplicity and strength, built around the powerful, yet altitude-limited, American Allison engine. They met the deadline. In 100 days, the NA-73X was rolled out. When the first production Mustang reached England in late 1941, RAF pilots were impressed and then perplexed. At low and medium altitudes, it was superlative, faster than a Spitfire V, more stable with a devastating armament and a ruggedness that inspired confidence. But above 0 feet, its performance fell off a cliff. The Allison engine simply couldn't breathe in the thin, cold air where the strategic war would be decided. The Mustang was consigned to the unglamorous role of Army cooperation, ground attack, photo reconnaissance, low-level sweeps, to the Luftwaffe, who occasionally glimpsed these sleek, low-flying intruders over occupied France. They were a minor nuisance. They dubbed it Die Haifischfloss, the shark fin, for its distinctive dorsal fuselage line. A sleek, pretty thing, they thought, but no high-altitude hunter. A thoroughbred running in the wrong race. The mindset of the German Jagdflieger in 1940–43 was one of hardened superiority. A mentality forged in victory and tempered by the tough, but still victorious battles on the Eastern Front and in the Mediterranean. Flying the ever-evolving Bf-109G or the brutishly powerful Focke-Wulf FW-190, he saw himself as the technological and tactical apex predator. His war was one of interception, of Schwerpunkt, hitting the enemy where he was most vulnerable. The American daylight bombing campaign, when it began in earnest, was seen as a tactical folly. The B-17s and B-24s flew in slow, tight boxes for mutual protection. Their early escorts, the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning, were capable, but they had a fatal flaw: range. They could only shepherd the bombers so far into the continent before their fuel gauges dictated a turn for home. The German pilot expected this. He would wait, often guided by sophisticated ground control, until the little friends had departed. Then, the Pulk, the bomber formation, would be naked, a herd of lumbering giants awaiting the wolves. The intercept was a calculated slaughter. He would dive from the sun, his cannon and machine guns ripping into the fortresses, watching for the satisfying bloom of flame, the slow, agonizing roll of a stricken aircraft. He fought over his own or friendly territory. If shot down, he parachuted to safety, often flying again the next day. The rhythm of battle was on his terms. What he experienced beginning in the deep winter of 1943–44 was the slow, then sudden, unraveling of this entire reality. First, the escorts stayed longer. The P-47s with new belly tanks pressed deeper. Then, a new shape appeared at the very limits of vision, a slender, distant silhouette that seemed to float with an eerie serenity at 30,000 feet. High above the boiling contrails and flak bursts, it didn't weave protectively around the bombers, it ranged ahead, a solitary hawk scanning for prey. The German pilot, ordering his squadron into formation, would eye this new threat. Perhaps it was a recon plane, perhaps it was lost. He would push his throttle to the gate, feeling the familiar surge of his injected engine, beginning his climbing attack. And then the distant shape would change. It would bank, and the sun would flash on a canopy that seemed all glass, offering a panoramic view of the sky. It would not run. It would turn toward the attack, and then it would simply accelerate, not with a straining, roaring effort, but with a smooth, silent, terrifying quickness as if the air itself was parting for it. The gap closed not because he was diving, but because it was moving faster. In those long, heart-pounding seconds of the merge, as the shapes resolved from specks to aircraft, he would see the details, the elegant, laminar flow wings, the unmistakable shark fin fuselage, the rows of heavy .50 caliber machine guns. The nickname came back to him, but now devoid of mockery, filled only with cold dread, der Haifisch, the shark. And he was no longer the wolf. He was prey, swimming in an ocean that had suddenly, inexplicably, become foreign. The catalyst for this nightmare was a British idea, executed with American industrial might. Rolls-Royce's brilliant engineer, Sir Stanley Hooker, had perfected the two-stage, two-speed supercharger for the Merlin engine, allowing it to produce phenomenal power in the thin air of the stratosphere. In England, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew a borrowed Mustang Mark I with a Merlin 61 swapped into its nose. His report was ecstatic. The marriage was transcendent. The Americans, initially skeptical, soon embraced the concept. In North America, the integration was perfected. The resulting aircraft, the P-51C, was a different species from its Allison-powered forebear. The data paints a picture of shocking supremacy. The P-51B's top speed jumped to over 440 miles per hour at 30,000 feet faster than the FW190A and the BF109G at that critical altitude. Its operational ceiling soared, but the most devastating statistic was range. With internal fuel, it could fly 750 miles. With two sleek, jettisonable 75-gallon paper tanks under its wings that extended to 1,200 miles. With a full 108-gallon centerline tank, it could fly over 1,600 miles. This meant Berlin was no longer a distant, untouchable target. A Mustang could take off from East Anglia, fly to the German capital, engage in combat for 30 minutes and return home. It was a logistical paradigm shift. The combat reports from 1944, now declassified, are filled with the palpable shock of the Luftwaffe. USAAF Captain Charles Chuck Yeager, later to break the sound barrier, recalled in his mission reports the confusion of German pilots who would break off attacks, seemingly bewildered by the presence of a single-engine fighter so deep inside Germany. A Luftwaffe after-action report from Jagdgeschwader 11, intercepted and translated, lamented the enemy escorts, particularly the new long-range Type P-51, are present in such strength and are so aggressive that our losses have reached unsustainable levels. The tactics of waiting for the escort to depart are no longer viable. The ultimate testament came from the highest level. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, the fighter commander, was summoned to a conference with Goering in the spring of 1944. As Galland recounted in his memoirs, a frustrated Goering blamed the pilots for lack of courage. Galland's reply was historic. Herr Reichsmarschall, when I saw the first Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost. It was not a question of courage. It was a physics question. The numbers vindicate his despair. In Big Week in February 1944, Mustangs, by then arriving in overwhelming numbers, cleared the skies for the bombers, breaking the back of the Luftwaffe's defensive fighter force in a war of attrition it could not win. The once mighty Jagdgeschwader were hollowed out, their veteran pilots dead or captured, replaced by poorly trained boys flying increasingly inferior machines. What the P-51 Mustang unleashed was not a single dramatic reversal, but a layered, irreversible transformation that reshaped the war from the cockpit to the highest councils of command. For American bomber crews, the change was existential. Before the Mustang, missions to places like Schweinfurt or Regensburg were grim wagers with death long. Exposed journeys into hostile skies where survival felt optional. Watching escorts turn back at the German border was like feeling a door slam shut on hope. Then came the little friends who stayed. The Mustangs did not merely accompany the bombers, they dominated the air around them. They hunted the hunters. Crews watched formations of Bf-109 scatter and dive away, not from flak, but because Mustangs had appeared high above, silent and deadly. The 8th Air Force campaign evolved from a bloody, sacrificial grind into a sustained, decisive strategic offensive. The bomber crews' self-image shifted. They were no longer lambs sent to slaughter, but spearheads protected by the finest fighter force the world had ever seen. For German fighter pilots, reality inverted. The technological pride that underpinned Nazi ideology shattered. The aircraft they believed embodied Aryan engineering superiority was suddenly outclassed by a machine built by a nation they had been taught to despise as decadent and weak. Their tactical assumptions collapsed. German airspace was no longer safe. The concept of a front line evaporated. The war followed them home. A pilot could be ambushed over his own airfield, bounced during landing, or hunted as he climbed into the sky. The confident aggression of the hunter gave way to the constant anxiety of the hunted, eyes forever scanning the sunlit blue for a distant speck. Ideology dissolved under the weight of fact. The future fast, sleek, and abundant was arriving from the west, and it could not be stopped. The Mustang did more than establish air superiority. It imposed a crushing sense of air inferiority. This clash of worlds was captured in a simple, recurring object, the orange. In the tight, oxygen-starved cockpit of a P-51 reeking of hot electronics, sweat, rubber, and cardite, a pilot might carry a piece of fruit. Not hardtack, not a ration bar, but a flawless, sun-bright orange from California or Florida. Before a long climb or during the weary return home, he would peel it. The sharp citrus scent would flood the cockpit, a vivid burst of life 7 miles above a shattered continent. Each sweet, tangy segment was a reminder of normalcy, abundance, and home. For the German pilot in 1944, war meant scarcity. Fuel was synthetic and unreliable, engines failed, aircraft quality declined under slave labor, and rations shrank as the homeland tightened under blockade and bombing. Anxiety about material lack was constant and corrosive. The American pilot fought with the quiet confidence of endless supply. The orange was not a ration, it was surplus. It symbolized a vast, seamless pipeline stretching from fertile soil, through free labor, across protected seas, and into a gloved hand over Berlin. It was democracy made edible, diverse, resilient, and born of freedom. Every peel tossed aside carried an unspoken message. This was not just a force that destroyed, but one that created, even in the enemy's skies. That first flight in the California dawn was a whisper, but within it lay an irrevocable truth. The P-51 Mustang was more than an aircraft, it was a physical argument against isolation and tyranny. It embodied the principle that no darkened corner of a continent would be left unchallenged. The laughter of the Jagdflieger faded not in a single catastrophe, but in countless moments. A stalled engine pierced by .50 caliber fire. An incredulous cry of acting. Mustang, over Vienna. A commander staring at lost charts he could no longer explain. The Mustang's victory was not measured only in kills. It was measured in freedom, the freedom for bombers to dismantle the engines of war, for armies to land without enemy skies overhead, for occupied nations to look up and dare to hope again. It was the sharp edge of an immense, generous industry, guided by ingenuity and necessity. Its legacy lives not only in museums, but in the line it drew across the heavens, declaring, "This far and no farther." It proved that abundance, joined with courage and purpose, is the most formidable weapon of all, and that even the darkest skies cannot hold back the dawn. Forever.